Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. I hope you guys are all having a fantastic Monday. Today we're going to be talking about something very exciting, rack systems. And I've seen some questions floating around on the internet lately about racks, and I've personally got some too about the kinds of racks I use. So I thought, why not jump on this? Let's talk about some racks. So first things first, you may ask yourself, Sam, what is a rack? Now I would hope you would already know, but if you don't, basically it is just a freestanding shelving unit that you can use to put all your beautiful little crested geckos on, and you can store all the other stuff you have laying around your house down below. Now, what a rack helps you do essentially is organize. That's the main point of a rack, and that's why you need one. I would venture to guess that most of you have between, maybe 1 to 5 crested geckos. Now, I'd say there's a small portion of you that have 10 plus, and if you have 10 plus geckos, congrats to you, but also you probably already own a rack. So I'm talking to some of you that are thinking about getting a rack, you just didn't know where to start. So the first thing is, why a rack? Well, obviously, like I said, you can put all your little geckos on it, and you can store all the other stuff you have. So for me personally, with all the geckos I own, I have a bunch of extra junk always laying around. I'm talking, extra cages, extra food dishes, sticks, hides, all that kind of junk. I always have it laying around, and what a rack does is, if you have the extra space, you can put it in one of the tubs on the rack and store it there, and it cleans up your room really nicely. And this is a big part of the rack. It's the main point, is the organization of your geckos and all your other junk. Now, before we jump into the kinds of racks that I use, let's talk about some of the options you have here when looking for your rack and the prices you can expect to pay. Now, there's really 3 options you have when it comes to getting your own rack. You can A, build your own rack, B, buy some rack from a breeder, like a person who builds professional cages, or C, you can hop down to your local Home Depot, Lowe's, or Menards and buy one of their racks. Now, I wanted to discuss all 3 of these options with you today so you know which one is the best for you. Now, I personally have experience in 2 of these categories, so let's start off with the building category. Now, the building category might seem like the best category, but it's actually not. Personally, I have built my own rack. My first rack was one I built. And, you might think, well, I'm going to save myself a bunch of money and I can do whatever I want with it. And that is true, but I don't believe that most of you have the tools to build your own rack. And I'm not saying that in a mean way. I'm just being honest. A lot of people don't have, a chop saw, a table saw, polyurethane coating laying around or stain and all that kind of stuff. And fortunately for me, I do, so I was lucky enough to be able to do this. Now, after building my first rack, I realized that, well, not only did I not save any money by building my own rack, that I also had to spend all the time putting it together. So in my opinion, there's only a couple pros when it comes to building your own racks. One of those being is, well, you can, do whatever you want. You can customize it however you please. If you want it to be 12 feet tall by 6 feet deep and 3.5 feet wide, then you can go ahead and build your own rack like that. And on top of that, you also get the experience of building something yourself. So that's always a good thing to have, but the cons kind of outweigh it. Not only do you have to spend all the time making it, you also have to go buy all the supplies, you have to have all the tools, and at the end of the day, it's going to take probably more time and more money to build your own rack than it would be to buy one. So your next option is buying one from someone who makes professional cages. Now, there's quite a few companies out there that build cages like this in rack systems. And personally, I think a lot of them look very nice. One thing to consider when building your rack or buying your rack is 99% of people don't have a separate facility for breeding geckos, right? They're all going to be keeping them in your house, myself included. So, having a rack that looks nice is very important. So this is a good option for someone who wants to have a nice looking rack, but is willing to dish out a little bit more money. And the reason these are going to cost more is, 1, because you're paying someone else to build your rack. 2, because it's not going to be made out of wood like I made my rack out of wood. And 3, it's also going to be more expensive to get it shipped. Chances are, if you're doing this, you're going to be buying a bigger racking system. So it's going to cost quite a bit of money, and that's something you should expect. Now, I personally haven't gone this route because I'm cheap. I'm like Mr. Krabs. It would kill me. It'd give me a little heart attack to do this. And personally, a lot of them are made out of like PVC or acrylic, and I really do not like that. And a lot of them have glass fronts on them. Some of them might anyway, or they're just made out of acrylic, and I tend to stay away from that. Frankly, even now, I have one glass cage. I had bought it off someone on Craigslist, and I was testing it out, because at one point I had thought about upgrading all my geckos into exoteric cages, and as it would turn out, I had never owned an Exoterra before, and it turns out I really do not like them, not even one bit. I do not like glass cages. So I'm probably going to end up selling this one, and I'll never own another glass cage for my crested geckos ever again, because I really do not like them. But that's for a different video, my rant on glass cages. If you have glass cages, nothing against you, anything like that. But anyway, we're getting off topic. Let's get back to the racks. So the pros of getting someone else to build your rack is obviously you don't have to spend any time building it. You don't have to buy any of the supplies. You don't have to worry about messing up. Someone else is doing that for you. And, you know, at the end of the day, you're going to get a really nice looking rack. Now, the cons is, one is probably going to be extremely expensive, or just pretty expensive. Like, I'm talking over $1,000 to get a decent sized rack custom made and sent to your house. So that's just something you should expect. For most people, that really isn't an option. But, you know, hey, it's out there, and if you want to do that, by all means, go ahead. If I was a millionaire, maybe I would do that and I had someone else to clean my cages, but I don't. So that's why I'm not going to do that option. And now we get down to the third and final option, my favorite option, and that is buying a quality rack from your local Home Depot or Lowe's. Now, this is a really good option for most people, including myself. This is the best option for me. There's a lot of options out there, different kinds of racks, colors of racks, styles of racks, whole bunch of different stuff. And I'm personally going to tell you what I use and how it's worked out for me so far. So if you were curious about some of the prices, obviously, like I said, building your own rack is not that cheap. The rack I built cost me about $60 in actual physical materials, plus all the time I spent. So that's pretty cheap, but I can also buy a rack that cost me 10 times as less time to put together for roughly the same price. I have some of these 30 wide racks. They're pretty small. They're like 5 feet tall, 30 inches wide, you know, pretty small rack. They weigh like 40 pounds or something like that. And I bought these racks because I could put more than one of them in the same area. Like, I can put them right next to each other and just have a bunch of them. And they're easily maneuverable. That's a good one too. If I want to pick it up and move it, I can easily do so. Or to like take off one of the boards and clean it is a really easy thing. Now, these 30-inch racks were only $50 from my local Menards. So that's a really good deal, you know. It houses a lot of little lizards on it. And it's cheap. And it's easy to put together. The specific brand of rack I use is called Muscle Rack. Now, one of the big things when I was buying my rack is I wanted it to look semi-decent because it is going to be in my house, right? So there's pretty much 3 types of racks when it comes to buying ones that are already going to be kind of like pre-made, I guess you could say. You're going to have like your metal and plywood or press board or particle board shelving ones. You're going to have your ones that are made out of like wire. They have wire for shelves. And then you're going to have your like plastic ones. Now, personally speaking, I think the plastic ones look cheap and they're cheesy, so I personally stay away from those. And that leaves us the particle board and metal or the wire ones. And personally, I also don't like the wire ones. The wire ones do work great. They're lighter, 10 times lighter. It's just the fact that since it's in my house, I want it to look a little bit decent. And getting the wire ones is like, doesn't look that great. So the personal brand I use is called Muscle Rack. It comes in all black metal, particle board shelves, and you know, I think it looks great. Now, there is some work that needs to go into you setting up this rack. It's not going to come fully assembled, and you should also know that the bigger the rack you buy, the heavier it's going to be. I recently just bought another one of these 5 foot by 72 or 6 feet tall shelves, and the particle board shelves are going to be the heaviest part of the actual rack itself. The whole setup weighed 120 pounds, so I needed some help. Plus, it's like a really big box that it comes in, so I needed some help getting it into the house, and trying to set it up is a little bit difficult. I'd recommend 2 people if you're doing one of the bigger racks, but the setup is very easy. You maybe need a rubber mallet and that's it. Otherwise, just your hands can put it together in about, 20 to 30 minutes is what it took me, and the smaller the shelf, the easier it'll be. However, any shelf that you buy, muscle rack or not, that has particle board shelves, press board shelves, any kind of shelves that's made out of wood, you're definitely going to want to coat the shelves in some kind of polyurethane or some kind of clear coat. I personally use a water-based polyurethane, and if you're going to do it right, you'd put on 3 coats with a light sanding in between. You're going to get a really nice glossy finish, and what this is going to do is it's going to protect your wood. Now you might say, well, that sounds dumb, Sam. Why would I want to protect the shelves? Well, if you live somewhere where there's high humidity, personally I live in Wisconsin, so this isn't as big of an issue, But if you live somewhere in, say, like Florida, and you have particle board shelves, the moisture is just going to destroy them over time. I like to think that these shelves are going to last a long time. I would hope so. And so coating them in the polyurethane protects them from the moisture. Particle board is particularly susceptible to absorbing moisture, warping, or, buckling over time, sagging. That's a big one. Especially the wider the shelf is, the bigger the piece of the particle board is, the bigger problem this could be. So I would definitely recommend 3 coats polyurethane. You can pick up a gallon of it for like $44, but that's going to last you a really long time, especially if you do light coats with a light sanding in between. And it's going to, on top of that, it'll make your shelf look a lot better. The shelves will be glossy and kind of like almost glow, I guess you could say. Plus, on top of that, let's say you spill some food on it, or your gecko decides it's a good place to go to the bathroom. It'll wipe right off, like super easily, versus if it was just a plain particle board, it's going to probably stain it a little bit. So I would definitely recommend coating it in some kind of clear coat. Doesn't have to be polyurethane, I guess, but any kind of, you could paint it, I guess, if you really wanted to. Whatever you want to do, just protect it somehow so that it doesn't start to warp over time from the moisture. Now you may be thinking to yourself, well, Sam, do I really need a rack? I have 3 geckos and, it's not really that big of a deal. But, 10 times out of 10, if you have 1 gecko, you're going to want more. If you have 3 geckos, you're going to want more. Or maybe you're just going to want to put all your other stuff on it. So I think making the investment in a rack is a really good idea. Even if you don't plan on getting any more reptiles in the future, even if you just have 1, buying a small rack can really help you put a bunch of stuff on it. It'll store it. I always seem to have junk all over the place, so racks are really nice for me in storing some of my extra junk too. Anyway, I hope this was helpful to you in determining what kind of rack system you should buy. If you have any questions, I'd love to hear them down below. Also, I'm curious to know how many of you already own a rack, so drop a comment down below. If you own a rack and what kind, I'd love to hear it. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this video about racks. I hope to see you guys in next week's video.